Hi, I'm Mary Beth Stapleton, Manager of Family and Community Partnerships for Hartford County Public Schools. Thanks for joining us for the Parent Academy Real Talk on balancing enrollment process. With me today, we're honored to have Mr. Cornell Brown, Assistant Superintendent of Operations. Did I say that right, Mr. Brown?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And Missy Valentino, who is our facilities planner. Hey, Missy.
Hello.
And we have a special guest, Kate Doiron, who works with Flo Analytics. And Kate, could you share for parents your official title?
Yes, I am a senior analyst at Flo Analytics.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for joining us and for helping parents understand what this process is all about, and just having that conversation and answering those questions that may be coming up in the community right now around the balancing enrollment process. So to get us started, Mr. Brown, I'd like to start with you, and then we'll go around, and if everyone can just give a quick bio for parents just to know your expertise and your background.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me here today. So my name is Cornell Brown. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Operations with Hartford County Public Schools. I am an architect by trade, graduated from Morgan State University with my master's degree in architecture. So I've been working in public schools now for over 25 years.
Wow.
Yes, I've worked in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, DC public schools, PG, and I've been here in Hartford County for going on 13 years. So it's been a wonderful experience for me here. But I am an architect by trade, and I still have some of those architectural tendencies that came with me in my training.
So do you have a special room at home with Legos and
I love sketch pads and Legos and things of that sort. So I love geometry and I love putting things together. So, so that's my background, Mary Beth. And again, I thank you guys for just having us here.
Well, thanks for being here and for taking the time. And Ms. Valentino, your background.
Hi, yes. So I graduated from Tufts University with a bachelor's in geography and environmental planning. And I actually started my career working in the GIS field, which is basically mapping, and moved into project management and more into the planning aspect throughout my career. I've been with Hartford County Public Schools for 5 years now, in planning and construction department, working through looking at enrollment projections, developing specifications for our new and replacement school facilities, and working with the capital budget.
Wow, that's a big job. Well, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And then Ms. Doiron, your background with Flo.
Yeah, so I, like Missy, have a GIS background. So I've actually been doing GIS work for 15, almost 16 years now. Been a GIS analyst almost the whole time since I graduated from college and grad school. And I started at Flo Analytics last year. So it has been an interesting year. I still haven't met my coworkers in person because we haven't been allowed to travel. I'm located on the East Coast. Yeah, so someday I'll get to meet them, but we've all been working together on school district projects this year. It's been a really interesting year, obviously, for school district work. But Flo has done over 90, I believe, boundary, assessments for school districts. So a lot of experience over the last few years helping with boundary assessments and enrollment balancing. So.
Great. So you're very proficient at this work. Thank you for being here. And Kate, I'm not quite sure I said your last name correctly. Could you correct me?
Yes, it's pronounced Doiron.
Doiron. I kept saying Dorian. I'm not quite
it's
sure
like
what that's
a silent I.
Thank you so much. Well, to get us started, what I did was I gathered some questions that I've been seeing on social media and in other venues that parents have been asking about the balancing enrollment process. Obviously, I've been hearing about it through board meetings and updates and such. So Cornell, just to start with you, if we could, about why is Hartford County Public Schools reviewing school boundaries right now? What's happening to make this process, get started?
Yeah, as the Assistant Superintendent for Operations for the school system, we're responsible for monitoring, student enrollment and how our facilities are being utilized. There's an adequate public facilities ordinance that the county has in place that governs student capacity, building capacity, and residential development and things of that sort. So in monitoring and projecting student enrollment, we have to make sure that our facilities are best suited for the students that we are expected to educate. So we have several of our schools throughout the county that is overcrowded. So we've been monitoring this, over the last 5 years, and we have, partnered with Flo Analytics to analyze our building capacity to determine the best way to make adjustments so that our buildings aren't overcrowded.
So this is not something that happened last year, or, I mean, this is a process that you're looking at for the last, did you say 5 years?
It's kind of built up over the last 5 years.
Okay.
And we've been planning for engaging, a facility planner organization like Flo Analytics to analyze how our buildings are used, to look at our student enrollment projections and our population and programs and things of that sort, to look at the demographics to determine how we can make adjustments in our attendance areas so that we can balance out student enrollment throughout the county and, better use our facilities, better use our staffing resources, so that we can be better equipped to deliver, sound programs to our students.
So some of our parents might have already noticed on their own that some of our schools are overcrowded. So you're just affirming that, and then this process is to review that and the boundaries and where we are with that. So that makes sense. Missy, thinking about the boundaries, what is the process? I know Flo is here as a partner in this work. If you could just describe as a planner, what's the process for boundary review?
Sure. So we have some schools that are over capacity, but they are a lot of times adjacent to schools that are under capacity. So just making minor adjustments and taking students in one area and moving them to another area can balance the enrollment between the two. Okay. And really, we have to look at the capacity at, sorry, what was that?
No, that's okay. I was just affirming that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's a tough conversation, I guess, is what my response was, right? When you say over capacity, under capacity, right? That's when, parents might have questions. So that's what I was wondering.
Okay. So when we say over capacity, the state they're the ones that actually define the capacity of our school based on standard calculations. The calculations are based off of permanent educational spaces within a building, and the APFO regulations, the adequate public facility regulations that Cornell spoke of earlier, they are based on the state rated capacity of a facility, and that's basically not necessarily, it doesn't mean anything for dictate class sizes. It just means how many student a facility is able to adequately provide education in an adequate setting.
Okay. And so Flo is a partner in the process. And yes. So Kate, can you speak about the process? I know that you have the community forum coming up next week. What's your role in this work?
So we actually started back in September with kind of data gathering, data review, data analysis. That was the whole fall. So bringing in, student information, figuring out how many students, go to a school currently, how many transfer to another school currently, all of these kinds of intersections of data. We talked to county planners and municipal planners about future development. And then Missy comes up with a student forecast every year for the future. So not only are we looking at what would happen to current students if we move, change these boundaries, but what would happen to students in the future? Are we looking at, maybe the school is fine now, but in the future it will be over capacity. So we're taking those forecasts into account and potential future development to figure out where are those future students going to be living, and if we move this area from one school to another, is it going to have 10 more students in it because now there's a development there in the future. So all of that data kind of coming in, and we have these models that we're able to run. So it's been really fun in the advisory teams where we, we talk as a group, we make a suggestion for a change, a boundary change, and then we can run the model and show it on the map and see if it worked or not. Did it balance the enrollment between the schools in that area. So yeah, it's been just a lot of data prep and getting ready for the advisory team meetings.
Well, and I think that's a great point for parents to hear, that this is not just the three of you having these conversations. So Cornell, could you speak about the advisory team and who is on the advisory team? How were they chosen?
Yes. So, as Kate mentioned, we have an advisory team, and an advisory group was formed by pulling different community stakeholders together. We have individuals from the school district on the advisory team, part of central office administration. We have principals, part of the advisory team. We also have parents, members, from the community. We have individuals from county government and the Department of Planning and Zoning. We have an employee from county government who is participating. So what we did, we worked with the local PTA, and we got volunteers from our Parent Teachers Association who was willing to volunteer and work with our advisory team. And we have parents who represent different parts of the county, southern, northern, eastern, central region. Parents that have elementary school, students in school, and high school students in school. And so we try to get a cross section of parent representation, and also to have on the advisory team content area specialists within the school district, the director of transportation, the executive director of facilities. We have the director from student services, so everyone is brought to the table to represent, just the different, interests throughout the community, so that they can work with us, Flo Analytics, work with Missy and myself, Chris Morton, who's the supervisor in planning construction, and we're doing like the technical work. But then we have people who are very familiar, with the community and very familiar with Harford County, who can provide firsthand information and input and feedback as we do the work that we will ultimately take out to the community, take to the superintendent in the form of a recommendation, and then move forward throughout the entire process that I know we're going to talk about a little later on.
Yeah, right. And so thinking about that, let's just talk about that now. So Missy, thinking about the process, some of the comments I've seen from parents, is this something that would change next school year? What is the timeline for this work?
Sure. So right now we are in the advisory team process, and this is where we're looking at different scenarios. In June, the advisory team will finish up their work. At that time, they will make a recommendation to the superintendent. The superintendent will then take those recommendations out to the public and continue to seek public feedback and make a final recommendation to the Board of Education early in the fall. At that time, the Board of Education will also listen to public comment and listen to any type of community input that is taking place, and make a final decision and vote by February of 2022. Mm-hmm. And it will be implemented, if it is approved, if changes are approved, would be implemented at the start of the September 2022 school year.
What can parents expect to hear? What information will they hear about? What updates?
So we will run through the process that we've been going through so far. So we'll kind of have a recording at the beginning that will run everyone through the process, where we are in the process, how we got here, why the process is happening, a lot of background. And then you'll hear from me just explaining some kind of general concepts about how we've been doing the work on the modeling and the boundary changes, and what numbers we're using, what data we're using. And then what we go to from there is 25-minute sessions per region. So let me explain regions real quick. We've been working on the elementary schools. So next week is the elementary schools only. Middle and high schools will be later, I believe at the beginning of June. So next week, just elementary schools. And what we have been doing is, if you can imagine, like Missy said, you've got one school that's over capacity, and it's in an area with other schools that are, at or under capacity. So we grouped schools throughout the county into these, what we call them, regions. And so we're working on these regions, and we will be talking through each region at the community forum next week. So about a 10-minute presentation about the proposed potential change areas in that region for each of the schools, and then a 15-minute Q&A session. So because this is a webinar format, we want to make sure anybody can come, and view the presentation. And so it's not a meeting format, it's a webinar format, but there is a live Q&A. People can type into the Q&A, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion based on what, folks are typing in to the Q&A. So we'll go region by region. Each region gets its own Q&A session.
And to be clear, if you're a high school fan, I'm a mother of a 9th grader. Mm-hmm. Is it appropriate for me to join next week? Would high schools be discussed?
High schools will not be discussed next week. So we're just discussing elementary schools, and a lot of people have questions about, aligning middle school and elementary school boundaries. Middle school and high school have the same boundaries, and then aligning those to these potential changes for elementary schools. And that is what we will be working on coming up in the advisory team. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so thinking about hearing the proposed changes and updates, how can parents provide feedback, concerns? I know they obviously can do the question and answer during the forum, but as the process goes, how do they reach out?
So for the forum next week, we will have a survey link that we will post several times in the Q&A chat at the end of each, region. And that will be posted on the website, I believe, for up to a week after the forum. And so the survey is pretty specific. So parents essentially get to choose which school, they're interested in, so you can really zero in, and it will show you the change areas in that, that affect that school, potentially affect that school. And then parents can comment on those specific potential change areas. So that gives us, we can really zoom in and say, okay, a lot of people have an issue with this particular neighborhood moving from here to here, and it allows the advisory team to get really good feedback on these, boundaries that we've, been discussing. So that survey will be available. That's kind of as a follow-up to the community forum. And then maybe Missy or Cornell can speak to, ongoing questions that folks have.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. So if I could go back a little bit, Mary Beth, so that I can kind of lay out the entire process and where parents and other community members can kind of, step in to provide ongoing feedback. So as we discussed, we're currently working with our advisory team to review any adjustments. So scenarios are being developed, and those scenarios will be presented at the Community Education Forum next week on the 14th. From now until the end of the process, anyone can submit input or feedback by way of our board contact form. So if they had any ideas, any concerns, they can feel free to advance those concerns in the normal manner that they would by using the contact form. And as always, they can always email myself at cornell.brown@hcps.org or Missy Valentino at missy.valentino, at hcps.org. And then we'll take that information and we'll pass that on to the advisory team for review and consideration. As Kate had mentioned, during the community education forums, we'll be conducting polls and surveys and things that will allow parents to give, feedback through that avenue. We'll take all of that information back to the advisory team, consider it, and make any adjustments that we feel that's needed based on that input. We'll come out in June and do the same for the secondary schools, and we'll present information to the community, the various scenarios that the advisory team developed in June on middle and high schools. Polls and surveys will be offered to the community for feedback. We'll get that information and we'll do the same. When we create the recommendations for the superintendent, we'll advance those to the superintendent. The superintendent will have his own hearings. And then the community will be invited to superintendent hearings on potential adjustments. and then they will have an opportunity to provide input through that process. The superintendent would take that input, work with the advisory team to make any adjustments that he feels necessary in order to create his recommendations that will go to the board in the fall. Then our school board, once they get the superintendent's recommendations, they will have their own public hearings. Mm-hmm. Then the public will be invited to those hearings. They can provide the board, feedback at that point, and then the board will consider those. They'll take that information, they'll deliberate, they'll work with the superintendent and administration, will work with Flo Analytics and Bloom to make any additional adjustments that might be warranted based on that feedback and based on what the board is looking to achieve. All of that would take place so that the board could make a decision in February of 2022, and then they would give direction to the superintendent and to administration to implement some adjustments in the school year starting 2022. So okay, that's the whole process. And I know it's kind of lengthy, but that kind of shows that, not just, next week input, the June additional input, the superintendent's hearings input, board's hearings input, and then decisions will be made. And all through the process, if an individual, a stakeholder from the community has any comments, concerns, additional feedback, they can always, through the contact form, advance that information, and that comes directly to us, and we'll have that, we'll compile it, we'll consider it, and then we'll do our work.
Great. Well, that's really good information and helpful too to know that this decision is definitely going to be planful, well thought out, definitely interactive as far as feedback from parents and input from the community. So I think that's reassuring for parents to hear for sure. Yeah. So thank you for clarifying that. And just to wrap us up real quick, just to kind of get a sense of this situation right now, we hear from parents that, I'm under a lot of stress because of the pandemic, right? Had to kind of, juggle my schedule and juggle my kids' schedule and all of this. Why now? Because this is a difficult conversation for some parents, right? And so there might be some additional anxiety, perhaps warranted, perhaps not. But that said, Missy, any thoughts around that as far as why now?
Sure. So I think the first thing to remember is basically what Cornell kind of went through. This is really a long process. And the process, we're just starting the advisory team process. However, the planning and funding, that all started prior to the pandemic. So while the public's seeing this main portion come out now, prior to the pandemic, we started the planning process and looking at our boundaries and communicating about the enrollment, going over the capacity at some schools and looking at different options that we had. It's important to remember that it is a long process and that it started prior to the pandemic while the advisory team portion started after the pandemic started, and it will continue throughout till next February 2022. So while it seems that the process started during the pandemic, it actually started prior to the pandemic. And it's important too to remember that we're going to see the same capacity issues at our school facilities as the students start to return to in-person learning. And we need to plan ahead so we can make sure we address those issues as we move into going back to in-person learning and getting back into our buildings.
Well, that is very reassuring to know that all of you are very much responsive to parents, right? So you're ready to answer their questions, provide information as you go, give them updates, hear from them. So I think that's just really reassuring for parents to hear right now that this is not a done deal. We're just getting started. We're ready to have these conversations. They could be tough conversations, but we're ready to hear from parents. So thank you all so much for joining me for the Parent Academy Real Talk. This has been a very helpful conversation, and we really encourage our parents to join the Community Education Forum next week, and we'll have the information linked to this video just so you can make sure you can just click on that link and join the conversation. So thanks again, and thanks for joining the Parent Academy Real Talk, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.